a foreign account to say we had even $10 inside it. Today, when they are tabling all the billionaires and the millions, that we have, they put Rawlings at number 9, I think. Second to last, and they've given me 50 million. Meanwhile, the last man behind me is Kofi Wayo. I don't know, did they give him 30 million or what? They've given him either 30 or 3 million. 30. As for Kofi Wayo, I know he's so broke that I believe he must have back and paid the newspaper, put me there and put 30 million against my name. I have answered that kind of thing. On 3 occasions, I will answer it again. They play these games as a way of whitewashing themselves, the genuine and the thieves amongst them, so that if Rawlings can have 50 million, there's nothing wrong with it. If I had it, I would have worked honestly for it, but I don't. They have it, the thieves and the honest ones. But they want it to be acceptable. They want it to look normal without anybody asking, how did you come by it? Ladies and gentlemen, you want to hear more?
Abuja, for these were the words of His Excellency Jerry John Rawlings, the founder and leader before now on the NDC party. Na nyankopon fa Rawlings kra nsie eye. Ewom se Rawlings enka ye ho nanso ene June 4th Emma Yeremfi, the founder of NDC, National Democratic Congress. Abuja, Rawlings ebe rule Ghana for so long. He started from somewhere in 1979. Oboya the bidu 2000 John Agyemang Rawlings ebeje ede toaso. Na nipa dodo na eti June 4th yet ebimu nim adekoro poten a ekoso June 4th. Enti enne me pese me no ko kakra na afide ye gye adwenkyere se ye kase June 4th kora edin poten ene koso e June 4th. Enti menim say so unim that kind of history so me pa cho busan for obetimi ene ya share through the comment section pa cho platform 1 hour with Munufie medin ene William Munufie amankona. Enti on the 4th of June revolution be ekoso Ghana in 1979. Junior military officers be arising against the senior ones over unpaid salaries. But that is what actually happened. And they were a bit frustrated to say, Omonje, Sikabia, my then minus no Emuay and Karabule, Ekoso, Ghana too much. They didn't understand it. The revolution, military government of that time, the Supreme Military Council, SMC2. Naira General Fred Akufu. Edano mochi JJ Rawlings edekoto efiase. Na ansoha yera Major General Watch-Zenator eko bowre prison ho eyi Rawlings edini pie. And then they headed straight to the interface, and that's how you go to radio stations, which might be, I think, say GBC or something like that. Do can also say we are too about good. Then this is a new leader. That is how our June 4th revolution, that is a bit history. Me, I can't actually. I think it's a bit longer, but to make it shorter, and that is how I say you cannot end. I was say Rawlings abakwasem kakra eto. Now me pacho wa wunim adekro potin na ekoso June 4th. 1979 Rawlings cool no. Me the whole video baba. Na ene topic a ye be discuss na rigging mechanisms bi easy epese hyehyɛ ma Alhaji Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia NPP win this year's particular election. Na eboboba NDC anya clue no amaduabo ene nsem bebre akoso ntia no so ye ba be discuss. But to do that no, and I say before we do that, me pacho yenko tie and yenko video, a very short video as to why the founder of NDC a coup in 1979.
Jerry Rawlings was sprung from his sweltering jail cell to lead a coup by other ranks of the Ghanaian army. This coup d'etat turned out to be a pace-setter event that reverberated throughout West Africa. This event, known as the June 4th Revolution in Ghana, was sparked when the then Supreme Military Council of General Fred Akufo put Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings on public trial for attempting to overthrow the government on May 15, 1979. The revolution itself and Jerry Rawlings' failed mutiny was a culmination of the turbulent period between 1972 to 1979, which would definitely go down in history as being the most traumatic and most dramatic and the most tragic period in the history of Ghana. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the story of the events pertaining to Ghana's famous June 4 revolution of 1979. Since attaining independence in 1957, Ghana has seen several military coups d'etats. On February 24, 1966, the civilian administration that ruled Ghana under the leadership of President Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup d'etat. Leaders of this 1966 military coup justified their takeover by saying that Kwame Nkrumah's administration was abusive and corrupt. They said that they were equally disturbed by Kwame Nkrumah's aggressive involvement in African politics and by his belief that Ghanaian troops could be sent everywhere in Africa to fight so-called liberation wars. Above all, they pointed to the absence of democratic practices in the nation, a situation which they claimed had affected the morale of the armed forces. After this coup against Kwame Nkrumah, Colonel Emmanuel Kotoka, Major Akwasi Afrifa, and the other coup leaders established the National Liberation Council to rule the nation until the beginning of the Second Republic in 1969. The elections that were held in 1969 brought the Oxford anthropologist Kofi Busia to power. However, in 1972, Kofi Busia was overthrown in a coup by General Ignatius Kuti Agyemang. Agyemang had been planning this coup 6 months into the Busia administration. Afterwards, General Agyemang then charged the Busia administration with corruption, arbitrary dismissals, economic mismanagement, and the implementation of policies that were designed to lower the army's morale. Kofi Busia had cut military personnel and their allowance. This did not go down well with General Agyemang, and that's why he went on to depose Busia. General Agyemang, who was now in charge, was born in Kumasi, Ghana on September 23, 1931. He enrolled in the army in March of 1959 after officer cadet training in England. At the time of the coup against Kofi Busia, he was the commanding officer of the 5th Battalion of the Ghanaian Army. Once in charge, Agyemang initially set up the National Redemption Council, which consisted largely of the people who had planned the original coup. But in 1975, he introduced the Supreme Military Council, which are called the SMC, and this council was made up of the commanders of the various military services. Ghana initially had good economic fortunes in the early days of this regime. Unfortunately, the country experienced dramatic economic decline 2 years on, and a period of unprecedented corruption ensued. Ghana's economy, already near bankruptcy under previous governments, collapsed completely. The revenues from cocoa were pocketed by the SMC and associated profiteers, and this money ended up in foreign bank accounts. It is said that the big men of the SMC wielded power to acquire wealth and dispense patronage, including those related to the rendering of sexual favors. Thus, the SMC and Agyemang himself, who was rumored to have many mistresses, received the nickname Fawo to beg your golf, meaning bring your backside for your golf, a term inspired by the habit of government officials giving Volkswagen Golf cars to their mistresses. The profiteering, cheating and corruption that the country witnessed between 1974 and 1979 became known as kalabule. Kalabule essentially meant fraud, and it entailed trying to make excessive profits. Kalabule also meant using political clout to gain an unfair advantage in Ghanaian society. Besides kalabule, the country also experienced a period of high inflation. The inflation level, which was at 10% in 1972, rose to about 116% by 1977. The working class in Ghana were now being paid for their labor in money that was rapidly losing value. Inputs for farming, spare parts and raw materials for industry became as scarce as basic consumer items. Faced with such a grim economic situation, many Ghanaians, especially academics and professionals, emigrated to Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Europe, the United States, and other countries. The country of Ghana also began to experience unprecedented strikes and industrial unrest. The climax of the period of the Agyemang regime was reached between October 1976 and July of 1979. This period is commonly referred to in Ghana as the Union Government or the Unigov period. In October 1976, General Agyemang, who had until this point consistently maintained that his government was not prepared to transfer power to civilian politicians, suddenly presented a proposal to form a non-party government composed of the military, the police, and civilians. Agyemang described this form of government as a union government, Unigov. The Unigov proposal by Agyemang plunged Ghana into a political crisis. It was openly opposed by a small but vocal section of the Ghanaian public, mainly professionals, former Progressive Party activists, and university students. In March of 1978, Ignatius Agyemang's SMC organized a referendum to determine the constitutional status of this Unigov proposal. The results of the referendum indicated that a majority of the valid votes were cast in favor of the Unigov proposal, but the conduct of the government during the campaign leading to the referendum, as well as the government's handling of the referendum results, really aggravated the already tense political atmosphere in Ghana. Rumors even started circulating that workers in sensitive sectors of industry were about to launch a strike. To make matters worse for General Agyemang, his fellow members of the SMC, who were all senior commanding officers, accused him of running the country as a one-man show, thereby exonerating themselves and shifting the blame solely on him. It was against this background that Ignatius Agyemang was removed from office as head of state on 5 July 1978 by his SMC colleagues. On this day, Lieutenant General Fred Akufo staged a palace coup and forced General Agyemang to resign and retire from the military. Lieutenant General Akufo then took Ignatius Agyemang's place as chairman of the second iteration of the Supreme Military Council. Akufo promised that elections would be held and that the country would return to civilian rule by 30 July 1979. Unfortunately, General Akufo's government was doomed from the very beginning. This was because the military was totally discredited in the view of the people at this point. Even inside the army, amongst the lower-ranking members, including one Jerry Rawlings, there was a general consensus that all members of the SMC were guilty of corruption and mismanagement and should be brought to trial. Akufo's conduct also didn't paint a pretty picture of him. Many probes and inquiries into state enterprises were initiated by Akufo's government, but no prosecutions followed. Even the now deposed Ignatius Agyemang, who had been put under village arrest in his home village, was not brought to trial. He merely lost his army retirement benefits. The people in his village, on which he had benevolently bestowed favors during his regime, were happy to have him in their midst. His birthday was celebrated lavishly, and a businesswoman from Kumasi presented him with a Mercedes-Benz as a gift. All of this showed to the common man that the SMC was not serious about reforms. It appeared that the SMC members would be guaranteed immunity to any legal proceedings connected to their dealings and finances. So all of these events led Jerry Rawlings to conduct a mutiny on 15 May 1979. Elections were scheduled to be held on the 18th of June 1979, but on May 15, 1979, there was an attempted mutiny led by Flight Lieutenant Jerry J. Rawlings. Jerry Rawlings was born in June of 1947 to a Scottish father who had been a chemist in Accra, Ghana's capital, and an airway mother. Rawlings attended the prestigious Agyemang Secondary School, leaving in 1966 to join the Air Force the following year. Following his initial cadet training, he was posted to the No. 1 Communications Squadron. At the time of the military mutiny that he led on the 15th of May 1979, he had achieved the rank of flight lieutenant and was attached to the number 4 Jet Squadron in Accra. There, he had begun to identify with a group within the armed forces who considered that there was an urgent need for radical political change in Ghana. And as I already alluded to, even though the regime of General Fred Akufo and the second iteration of the SMC had promised to hold multi-party elections, public dissatisfaction had reached a point where there were demands not just for civilian government, but for the punishment of Agyemang and his colleagues for their corruption and mismanagement. This is what led Jerry Rawlings to lead a small-scale armed forces mutiny on the 15th of May 1979. However, the attempt by Rawlings failed on the same day, and he and his associates were then arrested. Subsequently, Jerry Rawlings and his men appeared before a court-martial where he explained that his intentions were not to take power in order to stay in power, but to undertake a house cleaning of the armed forces whose higher ranks had exploited the civilians and the junior ranks in the army for too long. Rawlings also expressed concern about the extent of foreign domination of Ghana's economy. Newspaper reports of the proceedings from this trial gained Jerry Rawlings widespread popularity in Ghana. This situation in Ghana reached a new level in early June of 1979. The court proceedings for Jerry Rawlings' trial were due to reconvene on the 4th of June, but on the night of June 3, 1979, a group of junior officers, including one Major Boake Jan and enlisted personnel of the 5th Battalion and the reconnaissance regime in Camp Burma, staged a bloody coup and freed Jerry Rawlings. Jerry Rawlings did not know of the plan ahead of time. He later recalled that when the soldiers broke open his cell, he was uncertain if it was a government trick to kill him as he escaped. While he neither planned nor even fought in the insurrection that ensued, he was perfectly cast to play the hero who would unite a fractured public. Remember, his mutiny on 15 May and the trial had brought him newfound fame in Ghana. So Jerry Rawlings' future changed at 6 a.m. on June 4th, 1979, when he gave an improvised speech.
All right, these among others are a bit history. The June 4th uprising or revolution or something like that about Ghana. Now, when was a mail one you guys are sending said what is happening now is 100% times what was happening then. That's over to you. That is what Ghana have been, and will be our energy say. Obey Ghana and at a point in time, we get some group of people or some group of persons and these among others are some of the things that happen in our society. So we need to be correcting the wrongs in the society. Other than that, Ghana grow to the level as a year panel. Now I was for moving on. Young Watch-Zenator some message be years back, but I think listening to those kind of messages from Honorable Watch-Zenator Rawlings, and I want us to also take a look at things and what she actually said in this particular video. And baby, inti young Kwane and Watch-Zenator Rawlings, and so and quite come.
Yes, after the June 4th uprising, it is a day of somber reflection, because the conditions that led to the uprising are never far out of sight. And until we reach a point where those conditions that led to the June 4th uprising are no more present, we always stand the risk of repeating history. Ladies and gentlemen, as a member of Parliament, I stand here on behalf of the leadership of Parliament to also wish a happy anniversary, and not just to honor the memory of those whose lives were lost, but also to celebrate our presence here. I'm in Parliament today. We have a fourth republic today because the PNDC made it possible, and the PNDC was born out of the June 4th and 31st December. The blood that was shed on the following the 4th of June uprising must be a constant reminder of the ultimate price that others paid for values and principles to be restored. And it's not something we must celebrate. It is something that must serve as something on our consciences, so that we do not lead ourselves into that situation where something of that nature can happen again. The years that we have enjoyed of stable constitutional rule are not by accident. The Constitution of Ghana was drawn up by ordinary members of this country who came together and decided what was going to be their version of the 10 Commandments. In the Bible, the Israelites traveled the wilderness for 40 years. In those 40 years, they complained. Why did Moses take them out? They had food when they were in Egypt. Did they ask to be taken out? They complained, why is it that we're getting this manna? It's so boring. We want meat. They asked why they were being brought away from that. The journey away from repression to your true liberation is not an easy journey. And there will be times when it will be difficult. There will be times when our leaders will have to shoulder the burden of responsibility and be brave enough for the rest of us. That is what leadership is supposed to do. And so if we find ourselves here today, in a country that has moved away from principles that we once held dear, that led a lot of people to sacrifice their lives, we are walking on treacherous path right now, and we must remind ourselves of those values and bring ourselves back onto the straight and narrow. Because the promised land was only made possible when the people remembered who they truly were. They were given the 10 Commandments, that is our constitution, to guide them as to what was right and proper for them to do. As we sit here and we have a parliament that passes the laws that are meant for the country, the enforcement of the laws is important, but as individuals, we must remember that no collective stands in isolation. Ghana is not Ghana without the people of Ghana. And therefore, the principles that we hold dear, we must not hold in abstract and say, these are the principles of June 4th. What are our principles as the people of Ghana? As individuals, when we wake up every morning, what are the things that drive us, that make us want to be a part of what we call Ghana today? How can we make sure that the blood that was shed before, that the sacrifices that people made was not for nothing? It is by being true to those principles, the principles that do not die, the principles that make a country great. Countries all over the world look back on their revolution days, whether it is the French or the Americans, and blood was shed. Let us not sit here in Ghana and pretend like those things did not happen. Those things happened so we can be where we are today. And it is not to celebrate death or bloodshed, but to remind ourselves of what happens when you push human spirit to a certain point, that point of a dignity that makes people become what they did not know they could become. If we look just around the corner, we see what happened in Liberia, we see what happened in Rwanda. They never thought they would end up where they did, but they did. Let us take lessons from that by God's grace and by the magnanimity of those who came before us, we never had to experience what Liberia went through, and may it never be so. Let us kindly live by those principles. Every day, every time we go to church, to the mosques, when we pour libation, when we pray, and we pray, let us not be only for the prayers that we pray to God, but also to remember how do we live up to those principles in our daily lives, because that is the only way we can make sure that Ghana moves forward in a sustainable way, that we don't have people who are living below the poverty line who can then be deceived by those who have money when it comes to time to vote. People must have a dignified experience of life. They must be able to support themselves, so that if somebody comes to them and says, if I pay you, vote for me, they will look at the person and say, I have my own money. I will vote for you if you represent what I believe in. We now have an opportunity to vote every 4 years. Let us vote on things that we know are possible. We are discerning. We know what is true and what is not. Let us be guided by those principles in our choices of members of assembly, of members of parliament, of the executive. Let us not think that it is just 4 years and it will pass. A lot can happen in 4 years. So every time we go to vote for people, let us remember these are the people we are giving the authority to do what they are meant to do on our behalf. Let's make sure our leaders are accountable. There is no such thing as our buying. We are the ones who put everybody in office, and they must be accountable to us. And if they are not doing what we have asked them to do, we must ask them to give account, and they must do the proper thing. Comrades, this is a day that, like our deputy youth organizer said, we must use it to do that important soul searching and to start anew. There's a saying that life begins at 40. Perhaps we should look at this as an opportunity to restore what we believed in once upon a time and make sure that the younger generation knows where we came from. When we look at our tradition and we have people who are elders in our traditions always telling the story of where their people came from, it is so that the generations ahead do not forget the history, do not forget where we came from. And yes, our history is not always something pleasant and it is not always something that makes us rejoice, but it is our history and we must not run away from the reality of where we came from in order to make sure that we build a strong path towards where we want to be, because the future is only secured when we are honest about where we've come from and where we are today.
Enti Honorable Senator Rawlings, in fact, I love this lady. She's so brilliant, so excellent. I wish to say one of the days, and I'll be my running mate, and also be my lady NDC, I be the president of